Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. I'm joined this evening with Jeff Collins. Really good, mate.
Hello, Chris. How are things?
Yeah, not too bad. Thought I'd have you on this evening because you're a bit of a celebrity in Cardiff, meeting all these rock stars and so on. So do you want to tell the people kind of what you're about?
I've been in radio and TV for 30 odd years, working for the likes of BBC Wales and ITN, Sky News, Classic FM, LBC, Nation Radio, made in Cardiff back here in my hometown. And since about 2007, I've done a rock show, first of all for Sunshine Radio, which was the FM station for Monmouthshire and Herefordshire. And now I do it for Hard Rock Hell Radio, who, of course, there are all those Hard Rock Hell festivals, Hard Rock Hell Blues and Sleaze and the main festival. So they have a radio station, and I do a show every Wednesday called The Rock Jukebox, which goes out between 5 and 7. And I've written one or two books about music as well. There's one, yeah. And then the other one, of course, the Stuart Cable book, which I'll be referring to later because Billy Duffy from The Cult wrote the foreword for this book for me, which was very nice of him.
Cool. So where can they, what time can they find you on what website then, Jeff?
So yeah, if they go to hardrockhellradio.com or our Hard Rock Hell Radio app or any digital radio app like TuneIn Radio, or if you ask your smart speaker to play Hard Rock Hell Radio. So if you do that every Friday at 5 o'clock, you'll hear 2 hours of classic rock music with myself.
Cool. Can we just talk about the book real quick, Jeff? The inspiration behind it.
Which one? The Rockfield book? Yeah, I mean, I wrote a book it's back in 2007, and then we did an update with some new chapters in 2022. I've been writing some articles for Classic Rock magazine, and they asked me to come up with some ideas, and one of them was to do an article, which I eventually did, and actually was their front page lead. It was on the front cover, which was great. My interview with Robert Plant. I was thinking, we need to do some interviews about these great artists who record at Rockfield Studios, which is just outside Cardiff in Monmouthshire. It's a little farm. It was a farm, and they turned it into a residential studio, the world's first ever residential studio. And bands like Queen recorded there, and Judas Priest and Motorhead and Simple Minds and Oasis, all these great bands. And I kept wondering why these bands would come to rainy South Wales when they could be recording in Florida or Montserrat or the Bahamas. But they just love the studio and the people who run it, and it just got this amazing reputation. And I went there many years ago and said to them, I'm thinking of writing a book. Can I have a look around the studio? And the guy who runs the studio showed me around. He did say, look, I can't tell you any stories about the bands because obviously people wouldn't come here if they thought we were going to spill the beans about. And I said to him, well, I don't need you to tell me about the bands. I just want to see the studio, how it operates, how it works. Because all the bands are talking to me. Every band I mention Rockfield to, they love the place. They've got such fond memories of being there. They're all more than happy to speak to me. So, I spent a day with Lemmy, which was wonderful. I spent the day there with Robert Plant. Geddy Lee from Rush called me and had a chat. It was just a wonderful experience, really, really enjoyable experience to do.
Cool. So me and Jeff used to work together, which was always a pleasure. Running into Jeff, we were kind of on the same team together, which was always fun. And every time we go in the pub, I always ask him questions. I know we've said this before, but can you just tell the Lemmy story from Motorhead for me? I love that one.
You do like that one, don't you? I mean, yeah, Lemmy was a really interesting character. I spent most of the afternoon backstage with him in Cardiff because I had to interview him twice for my Rockfield book because Hawkwind had recorded there and Lemmy had been there with Hawkwind, and then Lemmy had been there with Motorhead, and he just had the most amazing stories. And when I first met him backstage, he was playing a one-armed bandit. I said to him, well, are you winning? And he just looked at me and said, well, no, not really. It's my money. But and his rider, the most important thing, his rider above the Jack Daniels even, were Kinder Eggs. He loved Kinder Eggs, and every gig he played, they had to have Kinder Eggs backstage for him. But yeah, I remember when I did the interview, he said to me, he said, interviews can be a bit dull. Let's make this exciting. Every question you ask me, we'll have a shot of Jack Daniels after I give the answer. And I remember thinking, well, hold on a second. I've got like about 25 questions for Motorhead and 20 odd questions for Hawkwind. It's going to be like about 40 shots. So, yeah, I was a little bit drunk at the end of that interview. It was incredible. Yeah.
So we got a little, I'm going to show a little video, and Jeff's going to talk us through this slide that I got. So just bear with me. I hope I don't have technical issues here. So we'll give it a go. So it's over to you, Jeff.
Yeah, so these pictures, that's me with Roger Glover of Deep Purple backstage at the Cardiff Arena, just chatting to him. That's Ricky Medlock from Lynyrd Skynyrd. I spoke to them before their gig at Cardiff. Now that's Howard Lees, the guitarist from Heart and Bad Company. And there's Paul Rodgers from Bad Company. So I saw Bad Company and Howard quite a lot. We'll be talking about him later. And that's me with Paul Rodgers backstage at the Led Zeppelin tribute gig way back in 2007. Duff McKagan, of course, from Guns N' Roses. I've interviewed him a few times. Lovely chap. As Mika von Herzen from the Von Herzen Brothers, with me clutching a record they signed for me to thank me for my support. They're a great band and a lovely bunch of people as well. There's Mr. McKagan again. There's some standing with him rather than interviewing him. That's Fish from Marillion. I had a really interesting interview with him, which heavily involves sport. And as I mentioned earlier, Billy Duffy from The Cult. He sort of wrote the foreword to my Stuart Cable book for me because he was big friends with Stuart Cable.
Cool. Very cool. Jeff got some amazing stories. So, yeah.
Some of them are not too bad.
Hope we'll get some new ones. So, album-wise, Jeff, which is the first one you want to show this evening?
Ooh, that's what who did I put first? So first of all was Duff McKagan. Obviously, with Guns N' Roses. Now, I didn't actually interview him when he was with Guns N' Roses. It was mainly with Loaded, his band, which he started before Velvet Revolver, then put on hiatus while he did Velvet Revolver. And then when Velvet Revolver disintegrated, when they fired Scott Weiland, who went back to Stone Temple Pilots, Loaded came back again. And yeah, Duff McKagan, he loves music. He's very interested in music. So you do like about a 5-10 minute interview with him, and then you have a bit of a chat with him as well. And I remember him once saying that, of course, with Guns N' Roses, he played bass, but with Loaded, he sang. And for some reason, he said, look, I can't play bass and sing. I can play rhythm guitar and sing, which is what he did with Loaded. And he mentioned Geddy Lee. He said, Geddy Lee off Rush, he can play bass and sing at the same time. But, that's like really serious rock, and he really does that. But he said, I can't. So we spoke about that a lot, which was, very interesting. And I caught up with Download twice, and he was just very enthusiastic about music and his love of music, and very supportive of young artists, people living near him, people who wrote to him or came across him. He would offer whatever support he could give. A very, very generous man. So yeah, one of my favorite interviewees, definitely.
Cool. Very, very cool. Do you remember the first time you met a famous person, Jeff?
Funny enough, I do actually, because I was at college and I knew I wanted to be a journalist. Back in those days, I was aiming for radio. You had to go to university and get a degree before you could be in TV and radio. And I was writing a college paper, and because my handwriting was so bad, I bought a really early desktop computer, and this would have been about maybe 10 years before the internet. So it was just a computer to write things on, but it had programs, and one of the programs I had could make a basic newspaper, which was fascinating. So we did that, and I remember thinking, we need to interview some famous people, and there were 3 of us working on it. And the first person I approached their management as a student, Rick Wakeman of Yes, he was coming nearby to South Wales, to Barrytown Memorial Hall, and I think it was his Gospels tour. So I got to interview Rick Wakeman backstage, and it's funny, I took a photo of Rick sitting backstage for the newspaper, obviously the college newspaper. But back then, that must have been 1985, 86, there was no such thing, no concept of a selfie, or as someone once said to me the other day, it should be called an ussy because there's 2 of you. But there was no such thing as, it didn't occur to me to stand by Rick Wakeman and turn the camera around and point it and get us both in there. You just took a photo of him and then showed it to people, and they say, look, I met Rick Wakeman, I took a photo of him. But you didn't think of having a photo together. That was, I think we were still in autograph territory. And but yeah, we wrote an interesting article about the gig and about the interview, and I think that was the first time I'd met someone who I'd seen in concerts, seen on stage, seen on TV, someone who's a name, and it was quite sort of awe-inspiring because you're meeting a hero and you're thinking, well, I've laid on my bed with the Yes records open. I've listened to Yes for 10 years, and I know every song. And here I am standing with the guy who makes Yes music. It was hard to compute, very weird.
Were you just sat there thinking, what is going on?
Yeah, pretty much you do. And I said before, I mean, we've talked before about when I did the Rockfield book, and I spent the day with Robert Plant at Rockfield Studios. And Phil Collins was Robert Plant's drummer because Robert Plant did his first 4 solo albums there. And I wanted to speak to Phil Collins, but he was very busy writing Tarzan in America. So I could get all of Robert Plant's band together at Rockfield on that day, except Phil Collins, who was in America. But he said I could ask him some questions on email, which I sent to him. And then he just sent me a little message at the end saying, when you meet Robert, can you say hello to him? Can you read out this message to him? So I remember, when I finally met Robert Plant, saying to him, I've got this message from Phil Collins, for you. And I just remember thinking, this is crazy. Phil Collins has asked me to speak to Robert Plant. A 14-year-old me watching Top of the Pops. My head would probably explode. And I think, as I said before, it was a funny note, because Phil Collins said, hi, Robert, hope you enjoy the day together with the band. Wish I could be there. I really loved playing with you. It's the best time of my life. And Robert Plant just looked at me and said, well, of course he loved playing with us. He's in Genesis, isn't he? Which I thought was very funny, but there we go.
It's not, Rockfield isn't what people think it's going to be.
Yeah.
To look on the outside.
It still looks like a farm, they still keep horses there, and they have some, you wouldn't think it was one of the world's most famous recording studios. Definitely not, but
if people don't know selection of artists there, Jeff.
Well, as I say, Wonderwall was recorded there by Oasis. Queen did Bohemian Rhapsody there. Famously, The Last Line comes from Rockfield, where Freddie Mercury couldn't think how to end Bohemian Rhapsody, but he saw a weather vane spinning in the farmyard courtyard and said, great, any way the wind blows, directly inspired. Coldplay recorded their first album there, and again, the song Yellow, directly inspired by Rockfield, because they were having a drink one night out at the garden, lots of light pollution where they come from in London and Essex, but they could see the stars because, out in this lovely field in Monmouthshire, just outside Cardiff. And the bass player said, look at the stars, see how they shine. And Chris Martin said, oh, I'll have that. That'll be the opening line too. So again, the studio directly inspiring a song. But yeah, Motorhead, Judas Priest, just Hawkwind, just so many classic bands from the 70s, 80s, right up till today, that still record there. Robert Plant, obviously, as I said, Rush. Rush did the first 2 albums outside Canada at Rockfield in South Wales. So it's played a big part in musical history. It's really, it's kind of a smallish studio, but it battles with any heavyweight.
I wasn't aware of Rush very big. After reading the book, I've done a deep dive on the band itself.
Oh, a huge band, Rush. I mean, they're such a big selling band, and just watching them come to Rockfield, and they were very down to earth. I remember them saying at one stage how when Neil Peart was doing a long drum session, they were just bored, so they would get some paint from the shed, and they started painting some of the windowsills because they needed something to. And the one thing that surprised them, though, bear in mind, in North America and Canada back in the 70s and 80s, they had thousands of cable channels, and they were really flummoxed when they came to UK and they found out we only had 3 TV channels, and that they were shut down, most of them, at midnight, and maybe BBC Two went on. And they would say, we'd finish recording at 9 at night, go and watch some TV, but there were only 3 channels. And then they said, and basically one of them would be darts. So we'd spend our time just watching darts for a few hours. And they didn't really have much of a concept of what that sport was. But they were quite thrown by our lack of TV channels in the 70s and 80s.
There's a guy I want to cover this evening. And he is Graham Wright.
Ah, yeah.
Rodeo. Tell me that story.
Oh, Graham's a lovely chap. I got in touch with him because he wrote a book with a fellow Black Sabbath roadie which they called How Black Was Our Sabbath. And if you ever get a chance to read it, it's a very funny book. So I thought he'd be a really interesting chap to interview, because what I didn't want to do was just interview the musicians, because they don't tell stories that are too embarrassing, because obviously it involves them. So I thought if I also interviewed the engineers, the producers, the roadies, people. I think with Oasis, I interviewed a photographer, a famous photographer who'd been following them around for 2 years, just to get a bit of a different perspective. And Graham was lovely, and we met. He came to Cardiff with the Rolling Stones, because he would basically work for 6 months, and they kind of make enough money then to take a few months off. But he was with the Stones, and he took me backstage, and he showed me around the Principality Stadium, and the big setup and all the trucks that they had. And they had 3 different trucks. So while they were building the Cardiff stage, they were dismantling the stage from Edinburgh, but there was already a 3rd truck at Wembley building the stage there, because it was so big. These gigantic towers. And we just went into the pub, and the pub was pretty much full of people with black T-shirts with the Rolling Stones on, various metal bands. It was loads of roadies, loads of fans. And we just had a fantastic afternoon drinking and talking about... we did the interview, first of all, about his experience at Rockfield, and then we just sat there talking for about 3 hours about all his work with various bands around America and the UK, and fascinating chat.
What's the setup like in Rockfield? Like the production itself, Jeff?
Well, it says they have 2 studios, a smaller one, the Coach House, and then they have the bigger one, the main studio. And at one stage, they had this little echo chamber with glass panels that they moved up and down to create different echo sounds. But it is kind of, it's a traditional studio, but you have the bigger one, and then you have a little smaller one for the bands who want to just take that, and because it's residential as well. So that was the key thing, that it was the first time that bands could stay there. And because they lived there on site, if you're writing a song and you think, you know what, I've got a riff, I don't want to lose it. If you're at a studio in London, or in those days, there's more residential studios now, but back in those days, in the 70s and 80s, you might be in a studio in London and you're thinking, oh, I'm just getting somewhere. I've just got the riff. Hold on, I think I've got it. Okay, time up, guys. See you tomorrow, 9 o'clock, and off you go back to the hotel room, And maybe when you get back to the hotel, you can try and pick it up, but you've probably lost your train of thought. So that was one of the key things, the fact that they could stay there. And a lot of bands I spoke to would say that they would work until 2 or 3 in the morning and then go to bed, get up a bit later the next day, because they wanted to keep that flow. They didn't want to say, oh, it's 10 o'clock, we should turn in now. They wanted to keep going, keep that creative flow going. So I think that was the key element, definitely.
And I should imagine it's quite busy there to book Smith's music.
Always, they had a bit of a dip, I guess, at the end of the 90s, early 2000s, where people could suddenly start recording at home cheaply and didn't have to spend a lot of money on studios. And I think for a few years, it wasn't lean. I think things dipped a tiny bit. Same for all studios, and not just them, as people thinking, hey, we can do this ourselves. And then bands started to realize, yes, we can record ourselves and do it ourselves, but actually it isn't as good. We need an engineer, we need a producer, we need a proper studio, soundproofing. So suddenly any band with serious aspiration would want a recording studio. I know loads of local Welsh bands who will message and say, hey, we're off to Rockfield. We can afford a few days. We've booked a few days there. We're going to record an EP or a single. And it still is that thing. If you want to make an impact, having a professionally recorded song or album is far better than if you've done it yourself at home. Unless, of course, you spent £4 million kitting out a wonderful studio, then you're okay.
What gave you the inspiration to write the book, Jeff?
Well, as I say, it was just a lot of the albums. I wouldn't have written it today, with an MP3 or a stream. You've got no idea where something's recorded, no idea who the producer is, no idea if there are guest artists, if there's a famous person playing guitar on that record. You don't know anything. But of course, back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, I'd be reading the album covers. And when I was doing the Stuart Cable book, he said exactly the same thing, because they recorded, Stereophonics at Rockfield, and Stuart always wanted to go there because he said the same thing as me. When he's, particularly the Rush albums, you're reading, and it's like, hold on, recorded at Rockfield Studios in South Wales? Good grief. And then you'd be playing a Queen album, Day of the Races or Sheer Heart Attack. Queen? We're in South Wales at Rockfield? Good grief. So it was just as a kid reading all these things. So when Classic Rock Magazine asked me to write an article, it just came into my head thinking, oh, actually, I might try and find out why these bands wanted to come to rainy South Wales rather than go somewhere else. So that was the inspiration behind it.
And it's a lot to do with the history as well.
Yeah, I mean, it just pick a decade, and there were amazing artists who've been there constantly. And I suppose once you get those early hits, like they had Paul Carrack with Ace doing How Long, which was a big hit single, and Queen in the 70s. So once you get those first big hits, and Dave Edmunds, I Hear You Knocking, once you get those hits, people always want to go to a recording studio where hits are being produced. And so many bands I spoke to would say, oh, we wanted to use the desk that Queen used. We wanted to sound like Queen. So once it's like everything in life, once you have success, it breeds more success.
Let's talk about Stereophonics. When were you introduced to the drummer, Stuart Cable?
When did I first meet? I think that was, we met because, again, it was when he'd left the Stereophonics and was doing that new band, Killing for Company, and they were brilliant. They should have been huge. They were the Stereophonics, but a bit heavier, with catchier choruses even, and they were amazing. And I remember, again, that started as a little story for Classic Rock Magazine, and I met Stuart in a pub called the Beverley in Cardiff in about 2006 and said, look, why don't we do a book, about your new band? Can you make this new band as successful as the Stereophonics? And then my editor, the book editor, said, look, we do need to put some Stereophonic stuff in there. So the first 4 chapters are about the Stereophonics, the success they had, how he ended up leaving them. And then the main chapter is, he was big friends with Roger Daltrey. And Roger Daltrey said to him, look, the Who are playing the first ever gig at the Liberty Stadium in Swansea. You guys should support us. Play for us. And they did. It was a big gig for Killing for Company. They were the first band to play a gig at the Liberty Stadium. They were the first band on stage. And Stuart was Roger Daltrey was very supportive. Stuart would send him ideas, and Roger would say, yeah, that's great, that's not so great. So, yeah, that band should have been absolutely huge. But unfortunately, Stuart passed away, sadly, before they could really release their first album and get it underway. In fact, one of the best records I have, and there's probably only a handful of people who have it, sadly. They went to Mono Valley, the sister studio of Rockfield, where bands would go to rehearse. Black Sabbath didn't record at Mono Valley Rockfield that often, but they would always go there to rehearse, or Mono Valley, the rehearsal studio. And Killing for Company went there, and they laid down 6 tracks, and they're brilliant. They're 6 of the best songs I've ever heard. And they gave me, they burned off a CD, the studio burned off a CD for me, so I've got the Mono Valley sessions, which I got. The band have it. And then by the time they put their first album out, they'd been playing these songs so much for about 2 years, they'd written new songs. So when they were going to do this first album, which kind of didn't come out in it came out there was a bit of a strange happening. So Nuclear Blast Records didn't really release it. It got released on their website and didn't really, do as well as it would have done if the record label had released it. But by the time they put that album together, they ditched those 6 original songs and had these newer songs, which were great, but I didn't think they were as great as the first 6. So most of those 6 songs don't appear on what was their debut album. And as I say, I must be one of the few people who have them. But it's one of the best albums I have. It's amazing tracks.
I'm just trying to think in my mind, Jeff, did that get released on CD at all?
The album did. I mean, like I said, there's Mono Valley, those first 6 songs didn't. So it's literally me and the band who are probably the only people who have them. But the first album, there was just a bit of a disagreement with the record company and the band's management, and in the end, Nuclear Blast decided not to release the album. They had it pegged. They were going to put it in the front of every HMV, and they were going to push it big. And then the band only released it on their website, and then Stuart died before they could give it a real push. So I know that some of the band don't really consider it to have been properly released, which is a shame, because, as I say, Killing for Company, they were such a good band, really were.
If anybody does know how good Stuart was as a person, not as a drummer, but as a person, I know you've got a little story about him when he went to the pub.
Yeah, I was saying, we went to the pub in Cwmaman, where the band are from, a little tiny pub in the village. And a friend of mine from Australia, she was a promoter involved in music, married a drummer. Her son is now a drummer, drumming in a band. She loves drummers. And she said to me, "Oh, I love Stuart Cable. I don't suppose you get him to sign, a little poster for me or a flyer." So we went in this pub and I had a Killing for Company little tiny postcard flyer. And I said to him, "Oh, you couldn't sign this to me for my friend Brenda in Australia, could you?" And he just said, "Hold on, Jeff, I can do better than that." And we drank our drinks, left, drove to his house nearby. He rushed upstairs and got 2 big drumskins and some drumsticks and signed them and said, "Here you go, send those to her." Which was really, really generous of him, I thought, didn't have to do that.
He was a cool guy, literally cool guy.
He was a very friendly, very generous guy. And we used to, again, chat about music for ages and ages and ages. And I got the book here. I mean, we were saying before, it was Billy Duffy from The Cult who did that pink little circle there. He did the foreword because he was really good friends with Stuart. And he said some lovely things about Stuart. If I just pick out here. So, for example, he said, "Look, the first time I met Stuart was at a charity event organised by Jimmy Page. It was a wonderful night with so many wonderful musicians present, and it brought out my inner fan. We wanted to jam on stage and do stuff together." He said, "Look, I thought Stuart was a lion of a man. I've met Tom Jones a few times. Stuart has that same large southern Welsh presence. He made me think of my favourite film of all time, Zulu. The movie shows how a small number of Welsh soldiers repelled an overwhelming number of Zulu warriors. It's the greatest film made, in my opinion, on so many levels. We could write a book about why that film is genius, but Stuart was like that whole Welsh regiment kind of thing. If I have to assess his character, I'd say he came across like that. He was a stand-up and reliable guy, the kind you'd want in the trenches with you." And then he says, "I love the Stereophonics. They were unashamed to rock. I felt they were a kindred spirit to the Cult." And, they got on really well. And I met Billy a few times, and he's a terrific chap. And the Cult have been to Rockfield quite a few times. They did some, I think one of their recent albums was done there as well. Yeah, Billy Duffy, very interesting character, very good guitarist,
That's a brilliant gateway, Jeff. You know where I'm going to go next?
Go on then, where are you going? The Cult, yeah. Well, I mean, one of my favourite albums, Electric, which is just great. They started it after the Love album, and it was in a very similar vein to the Love album, that kind of indie rock. And it was called Peace at the time. And they recorded it all. Recently, they put that kind of Peace album out as a bonus disc for the remastered Electric. But they ditched a few of the songs, then remade them. Like if you hear Love Removal Machine on the original Peace album, it's a lot tamer, a lot slower. And then Rick Rubin was producing the album. I remember talking to Billy Duffy about this and saying, Electric is such a great album. It's one of my favorite albums. It's got that very hard riffing sound. And Rick Rubin just said to Billy Duffy and Ian Astbury, the singer of the Cult, "Come on, guys, you like Led Zeppelin, don't you?" "Yeah." "And you love Aerosmith, don't you?" "Yeah." "Well, let's do that. Let's rock." It was as simple as that. And so they just put these incredibly heavy guitar riffs on the album. And so the Cult went from this indie rock band doing the likes of She Sells Sanctuary to the Electric album and those amazing heavy riffs. And again, like we were saying about a fan moment, this is really amazing. After I saw them at a gig in Wolverhampton, which was actually on my birthday, and that was the first time I met Billy Duffy, and it was just lovely to meet him and to listen to the person who made that great album explaining what they did, how they did it, why they did it. That was just that was just a big occasion. I enjoyed that.
I feel like the Cult are making a comeback. I seem to see on YouTube all the time people showing Cult albums.
Their last few albums have been really good. I saw them at Cardiff Castle about 18 months ago, and they were terrific. The Alarm was supporting them, and the Alarm, were an amazing band. That was one of my favorite stories as well. I interviewed Mike Peters of the Alarm quite a lot, and sadly passed away now. But he was such a terrific chap, and I remember interviewing him backstage once in Cardiff, and he was talking about being on tour with Bob Dylan and being on tour with Neil Young. And he said when he was on tour with Neil Young, on the tour bus, Neil Young came up to him and said, "Look, I've just written this song, Rocking in the Free World. I've recorded it with electrically and acoustically. I don't know which version is best. What do you think?" So, he played them both and said, "Well, they're both great, but yeah, go with the electric one." And they had a day off that night, and the Alarm decided to play a solo gig in LA. And Mike was so enamored with Keep on Rocking in the Free World and such a clever musician, he transcribed it all straight away, gave it to the band and said, look, we're going to play this tonight. We're going to play Keep on Rocking. It's such a great song. So they're playing it. This unrecorded Neil Young song. And he said they saw Neil Young on the side of the stage and he thinks, oh, I'm in trouble now. Neil Young's going to come on. And I'm in trouble now playing his song without his permission. And then he sees Neil Young coming onto the stage and he's thinking, oh my goodness, he's going to stop me mid-song and tell me off. But Neil Young just picks up a guitar and joins him playing the song. And Mike was saying, here I am, playing Keep on Rocking in the Free World, an unrecorded Neil Young classic, without his permission, but the guy comes on stage and joins me, He said that was just one of his favourite memories,
Cool. Your second album you're on the show, what are you thinking?
So the second one then, I think this is going to be, with Notion Bad Company, let's do Lynyrd Skynyrd. Now, the album is, I'm going to Give Me Back My Bullets, and this is a kind of press copy of a remastered version of it. It features some bonus live tracks, which were actually recorded in Cardiff, at the New Theatre in Cardiff in 1976 when the album came out. So I thought it was really nice that the album had a bit of a Cardiff local connection. But I remember meeting Ricky Medlock backstage, and I've never seen this anywhere before, but he told me that his great-great-grandmother was from Wales. So, he's got a sort of Lakota Sioux and Cherokee background, but his mum, I think, was from Ireland. He's got Irish and Scottish ancestry. But I'm sure he said to me he also has some Welsh ancestry. But every time we just search for it, it's never mentioned ever again. So I don't know whether I misheard him, but I'm pretty sure I'll have to dig out that interview and play it, because I'm pretty sure he told me that he had this Welsh ancestry. But Ricky Medlock was, again, really nice guy. He'd played with Lynyrd Skynyrd in the 70s, playing drums early on. Then he'd left and joined Blackfoot. And then in the 90s, he rejoined Skynyrd. He's been with him about 20 years now. He's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But yeah, Lynyrd Skynyrd, they were great on stage, great band. And Ricky was a fascinating one to talk to.
Has there been an interview you've got lined up that you were like, holy moly, what am I going to hear?
Yeah, there was one. David Bowie was one. So in about 1995, he was doing the Outsider tour. And with it on that tour was a guitarist called Reeves Gabrels, who's now with The Cure. And they were later, or rather a few years earlier, David Bowie got sick of being a pop star, and he decided to join a rock band where he wasn't, the spokesman, the front man. He was just one of four. It was a democratic band. He was just one of the guys, and it was called Tin Machine. And about 6 years later, the sound they had exploded. Pearl Jam, Nirvana, all those bands had that kind of. They were a bit too early, and Tin Machine got slammed unfairly, I think, because they were ahead of their time, because that sound would be so in vogue 6 years later. But I thought the Tin Machine album was amazing, and because he had Reeves Gabrels from Tin Machine with him on that tour, I did speak to him a lot about that album and said to him, I really enjoyed you in Tin Machine. I know some others didn't, but I thought you were amazing, and it was a really good interview because I was working for LBC in London, and I'd called up about doing an interview because, again, being a music fan, I tried to do as many music stories as I could. I mean, one we get onto next, which I also did with LBC, was Def Leppard, which was a fantastic interview. But the Bowie one, I rang them, and I remember them saying, look, we don't want to disturb David in the dressing room before the gig or after the gig. How about you do him at rehearsal? So I got to go down and watch him rehearse at Wembley Arena. I've got my little backstage pass, which says DB. That was my backstage pass from 1995. And I got to watch him rehearse the show. And then when they finished, he stayed on stage and they called me across and I walked up the steps onto the Wembley Arena stage, which I'd been to so many times to watch Yes and Asia and various bands. And here I was, standing on the stage at Wembley Arena, interviewing David Bowie. And you could see he was quite striking, his eyes, the one pupil bigger than the other, different colors, very striking eyes. But again, he was I was very nervous because I kept thinking, oh gosh, I don't want to ask the wrong thing. I don't want to make him think I'm a fool. But again, in my experience, when you interview the really, really, really famous rock stars, they treat you like you're their best mate. And I think that's the key. They know that they need to do this. They need to do the publicity, and they know they shouldn't annoy people or upset people. And most of the famous people I've spoken to, they do. You think you're the best pal the way they speak to you. And again, we stood on stage. We did about a 5-minute interview for LBC, and we must have stayed for another 15, 20 minutes just chatting about music and looking at the stage setup. And it was just an incredible interview. And I was very lucky, because I was chief reporter, to be able to pick and choose stories, and every now and again to be able to throw into the news meeting, let's do David Bowie, or as I say, the Def Leppard one is interesting. I'll mention that because, again, at that time in the mid-90s, Def Leppard, to promote their, was it 95? I think definitely 95, to promote their greatest hits album, Vault. I've got my little pass here. 3 concerts on 3 continents in one day. Now, they did cheat a little bit with time differences, but they did concerts in Morocco, London, and Canada in one day. And I got to fly to the Morocco one. So I'm on this private jet with Def Leppard headrests, flying to Morocco, where they'd play at the Cave of Hercules in Tangiers. And they'd play this underground acoustic concert. And as it was all to do, it was a Guinness World Record attempt to do these 3 concerts on 3 separate continents in one day to promote their greatest hits album. And I'll never forget, I interviewed lead singer Joe Elliott on the plane while we were flying to Morocco. And at the end of the interview, he just thought my name, Jeff, was hysterical. And he said, we're going to call you Def Jeff. So for the rest of that day, I was known as Def Jeff. And I remember being at the airport as we were leaving Morocco, this shout from across the airport, hey, Def Jeff. I turned around and there's Def Leppard all waving at me. But again, that was just superb. And again, it was before, I remember someone took some photographs on a little portable, those little plastic cameras you had at weddings.
Yeah.
But, you didn't take photos. And so many of the stories I did in the 90s, like being on the battle bus with John Major, the Prime Minister. You didn't take photos back then at all. You just have the memories, and it's the same with that. I sometimes watch videos of that very event. I remember what they did a 12-minute video of that Guinness Book of Records attempt. I remember watching it, seeing if I could see myself in the background, but I couldn't. But they played this amazing gig in a cave, and we had a lovely meal beforehand with the band in a tent, which was one of the strangest meals I've ever had. I remember they brought out the main course, and it looked like ribs in rice. And I remember thinking, oh, that's nice. And one of the guys pulled out this rib, and as he pulled it, the whole thing moved, and it was a spinal column in rice with these big globs of jelly on it. It was horrible. But that was a really good experience, and again, I got to do a radio piece. It went out on LBC, and I guess that's the thing with the career I've had. A lot of those radio pieces, it's not like, which is why I like the books so much, because the books are there and I can say to people, look, that's what I did. But nobody ever walks around and says, wow, I remember that report Jeff did in 1994 on David Bowie. That was amazing. Or I remember that news bulletin he read in 1991 on Classic FM. He sounded great. People don't still wander around talking about those things, unfortunately, except me, maybe.
It's good to have you as a friend, because you tell me all these amazing stories. Sometimes I come up with some beauties. That the gig we went to, which was Sunday 1994.
Yeah, that was a really enjoyable gig. I enjoyed that day. Yeah.
And again, sometimes you look at me and you go, what has he sent me now?
Yeah. No, they were a good band. I mean, you sent me you told me about them. I checked them out and got the EP. And again, like I was saying, when we met them, backstage, they were amenable to, they did the interview with me. They did the interview with you for your YouTube channel. And anything we asked them, they were happy to do. And again, we had a little chat with them, didn't we, after the interview about music and stuff. And we had a chat with them at the end of the gig. And mostly, I think you find most musicians are, very helpful and very friendly. There are one or two exceptions, but in my experience, I've not come across many who've been,
That was going to be my next question. Is there someone that could be a bit of an art?
Well, do you know what? There really isn't. There was one young band once where I did I can't remember what they're called now. Highly Citizen, or I can't remember what they were called, but they'd just been nominated, I think, for some award, and they were on quite a big label. And we were in Cardiff, and I was filming for Made in Cardiff TV. And again, the same thing. I was the news editor, so I suggested a lot of musical items for our news. And I thought, well, this one, it was Hailstorm. They were, at the time, I mean, they'd come back recently in the headlines. I love Hailstorm, but they were bottom of the bill. And then Blackstone Cherry were, Blackstone Cherry were top of the bill, and Shinedown were in the middle. And I interviewed all three of them. And again, the three members of the bands I interviewed were lovely, and they were so friendly, and they answered the questions, But this young band, the guy from the record label had called me and said, "We've just added them to this bill, with Hailstorm and Blackstone Cherry and Shinedown. I know you're interviewing those guys. Do you think you could interview this new band? They're really up and coming." And I said, "Yeah, of course, no problem at all." So I'm backstage, and I could hear from this open door from this other room, the band, and the tour manager was saying to the singer, "Oh, you got this interview with TV. Oh, I don't want to do it." "Well, come on. I only got in at 4:00 this morning. We were out drinking. Don't want to do it." And he was just, "Well, you've got to do it. Come on, it's good publicity. You're on a big bill." And he finally came out and just did one-word answers.
Yeah.
Everything I asked. Yeah, no. I remember thinking, so we didn't use them in the end. So they didn't get any publicity for that. But apart from that, most of the interviews have been really good. The only downside occasionally is sometimes you have to wait a lot. Sometimes, they're doing stuff. And like the Roger Glover interview we were talking about, I remember I missed the first act. I think it was Thin Lizzy with Ricky Warwick. When Thin Lizzy first came back, they went to Phil Lynnett's mum, Philomena Lynnett, and asked if they could have permission to carry on as Thin Lizzy, because all the band were there except Phil. And they got Ricky Warwick from The Almighty to fill in. And they were really good. They became Black Star Riders eventually. When they recorded stuff, they realized they didn't want to record as Thin Lizzy and add to the Thin Lizzy canon without Phil Lynott. They thought that'd be wrong. So they changed their name to Black Star Riders. And great band. And I remember when I heard their first album, it just sounded like a lost 70s Thin Lizzy album. But I miss them. I was interviewing Roger from Deep Purple. I got to see Styx, who were the other support band. Just up to them. Oh, they are one of my favorite bands since I was a kid. And Paradise Theatre in the 80s. They are just... And I've interviewed Dennis DeYoung, the former Styx singer. He's not the current incarnation. He left in the 90s, I think. But he's on all the classic songs. And again, one of those like little tiny, moments that we were talking about earlier, which don't mean anything to anyone except me. But, I was a big Styx fan. He was my hero. I think he's got one of the best voices in rock ever, Dennis DeYoung. What a voice he has. I was interviewing him over the phone. I've interviewed him a few times, about 3 times over the phone, never in person, sadly, because, again, he doesn't bring his solo tour to Europe. A lot of Americans don't really come to Europe. Van Halen never really came to Europe. Tom Petty came once or twice in 30-odd years. So Americans don't tend to come over here very often. But I interviewed him on the phone at his home in Chicago, and he had a grand piano right next to him. And as we were talking, he suddenly decided to play me the Styx hit Lady. So he starts playing it and sings a few of the verses and choruses. And then I was thinking, good grief, that's like my own version of Lady, my own personal version sung to me by Dennis DeYoung down the phone, which was incredible and made me smile for days and days and days,
There's one I want to cover. His name's Jeff as well. Mr. Elo himself. Electric Light Orchestra.
Oh, Jeff
Elo.
Yeah.
What was that like?
Well, again, I've never met him, Sandy. He's such a...
There's a story, isn't it, that you've got about his snooker.
Well, yes, I did meet... When I was reading the news on BRMB radio in Birmingham, Noddy Holder from Slade was the presenter, and he got Bev Bevan, the ELO drummer, in as a guest. And I was reading the news that day into the show, and I bought my brother a copy of an ELO album that I had. I bought him a vinyl copy of Face the Music, and I thought I was heading home that day. I said, well, I can get Bev to sign it. So I went down to my car, ripped the wrapping paper off, got Bev to sign this album for my brother. And we had a chat, and I said to him, well, I saw you, on your last tour, the Time tour in 1981, and you had that robot that came out on stage and shot lasers into the sky and spoke the robotic dialogue for everything. And Bev said, oh, yeah, he said, I believe Jeff's still got that. He said he's got it in his playroom, and he plays snooker with it. He's programmed it to play his snooker. And sure enough, just before ELO did their final tour, which Jeff Lynne fell ill on, unfortunately, you can see in the background that robot, which looks like R2-D2, that robot was there in the background by the pool table in his incredible mansion. And I remember thinking, that's amazing. It was so lovely to meet, Jeff. I've been such a big ELO fan, meeting Bev Bevan was wonderful. I've just got to say one other thing, meeting you here is I've been a big Marillion fan, and the Fish Marillion, that Fish era was what I grew up with. And I remember interviewing Fish, and he told me a great Rockfield story, which wasn't in the book. I'll tell that story now, but I used it on my radio show, obviously. But yeah, they were recording in Rockfield, and they decided to go for a drink in the local pub in Monmouth. But that pub, the pub all the Rockstars drink, is right at the back of the town, furthest one away from Rockfield. There's a million pubs in between they can stop at, but they go to the Nag's Head right at the back. So they nicked a dinghy, and it went round the River Mono, and then they're getting to the Nag's Head, and they suddenly realised they haven't got any oars. They don't know how to stop the thing. So Mark Kelly, the keyboard player, had a penknife, and he's stabbing this inflatable dinghy, and it's deflating. And they swam ashore, going to the Nag's Head, dripping wet, order some pints of lager. And another Fish said, they suddenly hear these voices go, okay, all right. And it was Dave Edmunds and Robert Plant standing at the bar.
No way.
Yeah. I looked over, oh, yeah, all right, guys, yeah, we're Marillion. But that was a funny day. When I interviewed him for the first time, funny enough, you were talking about rock stars not being on good form. I interviewed Fisher a third time once at a gig in Gloucester, but I'd interviewed him twice before. And he was in a bad mood that day. He was, again, one-word answers, grumpy answers, disputing things. And I had a friend with me who was a Marillion fan, and yeah, that day he was a bit grumpy. Something had obviously upset him. Not us, I hasten to add. But the first time I met him was I met him at the Point, a gig he did at the Point in Cardiff in 2007, September 2007. And he was in a really good mood because he's a lifelong Hibernian fan, and Hibs had just beaten Celtic 3-2.
Right.
When Celtic were good, when Celtic was still good. So it was a great win. And we did the interview on the tour bus. And as I said, we spoke about Rockfield as well. We did this great interview. And then suddenly Fish said to me, he said, in 15 minutes' time, it was the 2007 Rugby World Cup. He said, in 10 minutes' time, Scotland are playing the All Blacks. Should we go and watch? So there's a pub opposite. So I went with Fish, and we sat in this pub, people looking at us, that's Fish. And we watched the whole of the Scotland All Blacks. I mean, unfortunately, the All Blacks beat Scotland 40-0 that day. But we sat there for an hour and a half, ordering a few drinks, watching Scotland All Blacks. And again, I was sitting there thinking, I've just interviewed Fish, one of my heroes, but I'm now watching a World Cup rugby match with him and chatting away like we're all buddies. It was, very surreal.
Let me just quickly go to the chat. 2 seconds. Adrian, how's it going, mate? Hope you're well. Adrian tunes in every week. Off subject slightly. No, this is just me. Any issues with getting backstage when you've been promised a VIP pack and it hasn't kicked off and you've had to make some calls? Now, we've been through this together on Saturday 1994. You made a call, and within 10 minutes, somebody's come down.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you turn up at a venue and they don't believe you're there. You say to them, I'm here to see so-and-so, and they're like, really? I've not heard. And it's kind of like their territory, isn't it? They're the front of house for this venue, and the band who are playing haven't told them you're turning up.
Yeah.
So they get kind of a bit funny about it. It doesn't happen too often, luckily. But it's harder to get backstage since COVID, I must admit. Before COVID, any band would let you backstage all the time. And we did loads of interviews when I was on Nation Radio, wherever I was. You'd go backstage, do the interview, and it would be fine. Now, since COVID and, when they stopped people going backstage, obviously, to stop the disease being spread. But now the number of bands will say, oh, we don't do interviews backstage anymore. We just don't do that. And so hopefully, if you know them really well, you can circumnavigate that. I remember that happened to me once with Foreigner, where they came to the UK, but this was before COVID, but I remember them saying, we're not doing any interviews. We're just playing 3 or 4 gigs in the UK and we're going straight out. But luckily I knew the bass player, Jeff Pilson, quite well. He'd been helping a band called Benedictum, who I knew quite well. And he played in a few bands I knew. I'd spoken to him before. He'd been in Foreigner. So luckily he said to me, when you get there, just give us a ring and come on down. We'll do an interview. And I remember a fellow radio DJ getting about upset because he was at the gig and Foreigner weren't doing any interviews. He said, how come you've got the interview? And I remember thinking, well, look, you know people too, and they'll do interviews with you and not with others because you've got a good relationship with them. This kind of thing happens, But yeah, certainly since COVID, it's much harder to get bands to do interviews backstage. And often they'll now say, well, look, we'll do you on a video call before the gig, which isn't the same, when you're doing a show, listeners like you describing what's going on backstage and that access all areas that, most people don't see backstage. And I found that with the Robfield book, people like that. People like getting access in documentaries and interviews to things they wouldn't normally see. They like being taken somewhere they wouldn't normally go. So it's a shame that those things are getting harder. As I was saying, I've got an interview with Reeves Gabrels from The Cure, who played all those years with Bowie and in Tin Machine. And but even he was saying, look, The Cure aren't going to do any interviews on the day at Cardiff Castle. And it's just becoming one of those things, unfortunately, where now they've got used to it. Bands are like, hey, we don't have to let people backstage anymore.
I found when we went backstage together, they're kind of on pin, kind of what are they asking you, that kind of stuff. As soon as I described their YouTube channel, Talk with Vinyl Record, I bought their records, really enjoyed it. I find, and as soon as I said that, they were like, "Do you want a beer?"
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. It's funny, yeah. I've you do get offered a beer a lot backstage, and I'm like, I'm drinking, with someone from Deep Purple backstage. But I think the key thing to remember, and I used to say this to people a lot when I was interviewing on TV and radio. There are 2 types of interview, and you have to tell musicians that they fall into that second type. There's one type which is rarer. When someone's done something wrong, when a councillor has committed fraud or embezzled from the council, or when someone's committed a crime, you've got to ask tough questions. You've got to try and get to the truth. And so the questions might be a bit tougher. But when you're doing a story about a band releasing an album or a sporting event coming to a town, there's no need to ask hard questions. You're not there to give them a hard time. And it's just, with a band, unless maybe they've got in trouble on a previous gig and they've been arrested, and you want to ask them about that arrest and put some tough questions to them, which is rare, you don't need to grill someone about the album release. So I think, but when you let them know, and I always have a little bit of a chat with every artist I interview. I have a chat with them beforehand, just so they can know. And I think when they know that you know their work, because bands do tend to climb up. If someone's been, and I saw this occasionally, not often, but occasionally on some radio and TV stations, where they send someone who doesn't like the band they're interviewing, or maybe they don't like that genre of music, and they would turn up, ask ridiculous questions, or they would not know what the name of the latest album is called. They wouldn't know the band members, and that just gets silly, and that then upsets the bands because they're like, "What? You don't even know who we are? You don't know the name of our album? What's going on here?" So when you have a chat with people and say to them, "I like this. I love that album you did 5 years ago. I love the way you did this." Yeah, they relax straight away, think, "Hey, this is someone who knows what we're about, and they're not here to harm us. They're here to just..."
I found when we watched And in 1994, because I bought the album, I told you about it, and I was picking tracks that I liked. Their attitude can change completely towards us within seconds.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that is the way to do it. But I found it's the same with, with most people. If even when I was in news, if you had a chat with people to explain what you wanted to do, look, You're part of the local government. There's a company coming here. They're spending millions. They're employing loads of people. This is a great news story for the city. Once you tell that to them, they relax, and you don't need to grill people unnecessarily, only when it's needed. And I think when you interviewing people is about getting that trust. You see various interviews on these shows on TV, the interviews that go wrong, and it's invariably because they don't know the subject, they haven't done their research, they don't connect with that person. So having that connection with people is so important. I used to tell, our young reporters when I was a news editor on TV and radio, I used to tell them, look, this is the thing you do. You've got to speak to people, communicate with them, let them know what you want, how they can help you, and what the end product will be. And generally, then they will be nice to you.
Yeah, it is very true, Jeff. I noticed that, I noticed that with Stuart from the Stereophonics, we became really good friends because I just say it like it is. Just ask him the questions. Performance a cocktail album when he's driving a motorcycle, and he said that I think it was Kelly was on the back of his because he couldn't drive at the time, and it was kind of cool. But yeah, it's those stories from the bands that I find really, really good that normal people wouldn't know. That makes sense.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's like I say, all the people I've interviewed, you feel it might not mean something to a lot of people, but sometimes, when you ask someone you're a fan of or who's been your hero and you ask them something and they let you into their world and tell you these little snippets that you may not have realized. It's and it makes you feel special. You think, wow, I can't believe I found that out. I really love this artist. And you do, like I say, all the artists I've interviewed, you do sometimes feel that you're getting, a little glimpse into their world. I mean, one of my favorite ones. I think I may have told you. I've told you this before, I'm sure. But Whitesnake. I remember interviewing David Coverdale, and again,
tell a story for everybody to listen. This is amazing. Go, Jeff. Go.
Yeah, this is again. He treated me like I was his best mate, as they all do, Which is, but we were just chatting away, and I remember there were two things I said to him at the very beginning. We were talking about difficulties being a rock star, and he said, sometimes I book into hotels under a false name. He said, if I give my name, some receptionist invariably tells their friends and the world, David Coverdale from Whitesnake's here, and before you know it, everyone's at the hotel. So I said, that's it, yeah. And we got talking about that because I'd said to him, looking at this new album, 15 years on from Whitesnake, and looking back at the beginning, how do you find that journey? Has it gone in a flash? Is it like you've gone through a wormhole? And I remember saying, oh, I love that word, wormhole. Yes, next time I go to a hotel, I'm going to book in as Ernest Wormhole. Which, yeah, he wrote it down. Ernest Wormhole. I'll remember that, he said. But I remember when I first met him and I introduced myself and I said, hi, at the time I was doing the rock show for Sunshine Radio in Monmouthshire and Herefordshire, the last ever FM station in the UK to be awarded. And I was doing an interview for my rock show there. And I said to him, hi, Jeff Collins from Sunshine Radio. And of course, David Coverdale's from Scarborough, initially rainy Scarborough in Yorkshire. But he now lives in Nevada, sunny Nevada, Lake Tahoe. And I just remember when I said to him on Sunshine Radio, he just said, and forgive the language if it's
no, you can go for it. Go on, Jeff.
It's not that rude, but he just said, Sunshine Radio. He said, surely from the UK you should be pissing down with Rain FM.
That's a great name for a radio station.
So I thought that was wonderful, yeah. But he was great to talk to as well. Really enjoyed chatting to him, and yeah, I loved the version of Deep Purple that he was in as well. I thought he was great in Deep Purple, and Burn is one of my favorite Deep Purple.
Before we go a bit deeper, because there's a Who question that I need you to answer for me, we will go to the chat real quick. Now Spinning TV. Hi guys, how's it going? Hope you are well. The Who, you managed to have an interview with him I have to wait it backstage for such a long time. Please, Jeff, tell that story, mate, for everybody.
Well, yeah, when I was doing the Stuart Cable book, as I say, he became good friends with Roger Daltrey, and they did that gig at the Liberty Stadium, Killing for Company, with Stuart Cable. And I thought that made the centerpiece of the book. That was the middle few chapters. That was the big thing. It was such a big day. And I'd been chasing Roger Daltrey for ages. And Stuart was kind of quite busy. I think, if I thought about it, he could have probably hooked me up much quicker, but I don't know why I decided to do it myself. I chased his management, Bill Kerbishley, the Who's management, and we were slowly getting somewhere, but it was very slow. And I didn't get the interview right until the end of the Who gig. I thought for a while, this is not going to happen. And I managed to go backstage with Roger. He had a bit of a blanket over his shoulder and he had a cup of tea. And his PR person said, "Oh, Roger's very tired and he wants to leave soon, so don't be longer than 5 minutes." So me and my friend Andrew was there taking photos for the book, and we've got a few of those photos in the book. I don't know if I can see if I can find one actually. And we finally got Roger, and I did about a 10-minute interview with him. Actually, I think this might be the press copy without the photos in. So yeah, no photos. Sorry. But yeah, we finally got hold of Roger, and we did the interview in about 10 minutes. And I think he really enjoyed it because the thrust of the interview was his relationship with Stuart Cable, how they met, how well they got on, the fact he'd started a new band, what did he think of the new band. And this is where Roger was saying about how much he was trying to help. And there weren't really any questions about the Who. It was mainly about their gig and why they'd asked Stuart to play, but it wasn't really about the Who. It was about Stuart. And I think Roger really enjoyed that, Roger Daltrey. I think he enjoyed the fact that he's doing this interview, but it's about something else that he's involved with, but he's not the focus of attention. And the interview finished, and me and Andrew were thinking, well, we'd better scarf it now. The guy's cold and tired and wants to go home, so we've been told. We were there for about an hour, chatting music. He just, again, loves music. And we just got chatting about various bands we like and things we like. And it was about an hour. And finally, someone came in and said, "Hey, Roger, we're going to be leaving soon. You better go." But yeah, that was just an incredible day. Because again, you're sitting there with Roger Daltrey from The Who, just chatting music, drinking a beer, and very surreal. But
Did you meet him before? Was that the first meeting you had with him?
that was the first time I'd ever met him, yeah.
And I bet he remembered you, Joe.
Well, you'd like to think so.
So cool. Next album you're going to show, Jeff?
What have you got left? I think this is the last one. The last one. Now, this is a favourite of mine. They're a really good band. And I came across them first in 2010. There's a guy called Dante who worked for Spinefarm Records, and he kept messaging me at Sunshine Radio saying, "There's a new band you've got to hear. They're called the Von Hertzen Brothers, and they've had 3 or 4 big hit albums in Finland, the big sellers in Finland. And we're trying to now make them break the world." And their last 5 or 6 albums have all been top 20, top 30 in the UK. They're really doing well now. And I love this album. Love Remains the Same. There's a song called Somewhere in the Middle, which sounds a little bit like Dave Gilmour, but better. The guitar work. And the lead singer, Mikko von Hertzen, has the most amazingly beautiful voice. And they're kind of a proggy, bit classic rock, but again, the harmonies and the musicianship, they are the most amazing band. But they're so lovely. I met particularly Mikko, 2010 at the High Voltage Festival in London. Then they came to Cardiff, and we had a big chat in a coffee shop in Cardiff before the gig. And all these Finnish people had come to Cardiff to see the gig, had flown from Finland. And we're in this coffee shop, and people kept coming up to us and talking to him in Finnish, which was really weird in Wales. Because I kept saying, I didn't know there were so many Finnish people here. But he said, "Oh no, these guys fly around the world to see us." And that was a lovely gig. Again, just little moments that make you smile. He stopped the gig. Mikko, halfway through the gig at the Barfly in Cardiff, he stopped it and said, "Is Jeff Collins here?" Oh, I can't put my hands up. He said, "Everyone, this is Jeff. He's done more than anyone to promote Von Hertzen Brothers in the UK. We love him to pieces. This song's for you, Jeff. Angel Eyes." And they played the song for me. And then later I met them at the Steelhouse Festival, which they loved because it's on a mountain in Aberfell. And it looks like those old Californian 70s festivals, it's on a mountain, lots of greenery, lots of trees, beautiful festival. And again, I was going to do an interview with them backstage, but I had another interview first. They were later. And I suddenly heard this voice, Jeff, come here. And it was Miko, and he ran out, gave me a big hug, and then said, wait there. And he disappeared backstage, came out, and they got me this, they'd signed a record to me.
Wow.
Yeah, thanks for all the support. And he said, look, here, have this. And we keep in touch. I mean, I remember I took my son to see them in concert a few years ago. And my son's birthday is Christmas Day, and they kind of, Miko was singing a message to me on Christmas Day. Happy birthday to your son. Pass on your best wishes. And, we always message. He's such a lovely chap. But they are a good band. I tell you, if you haven't heard the Von Herzen brothers, anyone watching this, go and listen to them. Go and buy their albums. I think it's their 25th anniversary this year. They're celebrating. And they're releasing some of their early albums on vinyl, which haven't been out for a while. But they are the most extraordinary band. Fantastic musicianship, very, very catchy melodies, great harmonies. They are stunning. They're one of my favourite bands.
What genre are you putting them into, Jeff?
Well, I think they're more prog rock, but only because they're experimental. Their songs are very different. They'll, one song will be quite stripped back and basic. The next song will be chord changes here, there, and everywhere. But the thing they all have in common, honestly, they are all A, so catchy, B, the lead singer, Miko, his voice is tremendous. The musicianship is incredible. And every album, I've got all their albums pretty much, and they're all flawless. There's not a dud song anywhere. And and they're very uplifting songs as well. And they're definitely a band more people should check out.
So this has been amazing, Jeff. I feel like there's a part 3 coming soon.
Yeah. Well, funny enough, when I was looking through interviews I'd done, I did have to leave quite a few out. But there we go.
If nobody hasn't checked out Jeff, go and pick this book up. I will put a description down below for Amazon that you can go and check out. I'll put a description for Jeff's rock radio channel. Do you want to tell everybody before you go kind of where they can find you on Instagram and kind of, your rock show itself?
Oh gosh, well, I mean, generally, if you just search for Jeff Collins and rock show, you'll find me at some stage on Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok, and
I'll put a description down below.
Yeah, and then because obviously there are different names for different channels, and and hopefully if you do get the book, I hope you enjoy it. I know a lot of people said to me that when they've read it, it kind of reads like a radio documentary because it's got that kind of descriptive, which is obviously what I did. I mean, I must admit, when I first wrote that book, I was a bit concerned because my career up until that point, particularly in radio, had been distilling things into 3 lines. You get like a 4-page press release, but you've got to distill it into 3 or 4 lines for radio. You can't read 4 pages on a radio news bulletin. That'll be the whole thing. And I remember thinking, gosh, this could be the shortest book in history. This could be like 5 pages long. But I did enjoy the writing of it, and I'd never written anything so long before, and it was amazing, and it was a really good experience. And hopefully, if anybody reads it, they'll enjoy it too. Because it's not, as I say, it's not a dry book. It tries to be funny. The stories from the bands are funny. There's a story about when people at Rockfield decided to try and land a plane there to get more bands from America, and they're talking about this plane landing by the farm, and that's hysterical. And so there's hopefully lots of funny stories in there, and hopefully it's very amusing and enjoyable.
Cool, mate. Very, very cool. Your rock show itself.
Oh yeah, again. So yeah, every Wednesday, 5 p.m. Hard Rock Hell Radio. So if you either go to the website or any, like I said, it could be TuneIn Radio, any digital website. It could be the Hard Rock Hell app, or just say to your smart speaker at 5 o'clock on Wednesday, play Hard Rock Hell Radio, and there will be my 2-hour show playing 2 hours of classic rock for people to enjoy.
Jeff has also got a YouTube channel, which I will link down below. There's some good stuff with it, Jeff. Not a lot of people know you've worked for the BBC as well.
Yeah, the BBC was when I'd been working mainly in news, on local radio and TV, particularly in London, like on RTN and Sky News. And then an opportunity came up to switch to sport. And normally, you don't get that opportunity because they would look at me and say, but you're a news reporter. We know
Right.
you like sport, but you're not a trained sports reporter. You're news. And there's this big division, you know. But the BBC were trying to newsify their sport, for want of better reason. They wanted to launch a sports news channel on BBC Choice Wales when digital launched. And when my CV dropped on the desk for this TV job, the two bosses of BBC World Sport thought, wow, look at this guy from LBC, ITN, Sky. He can add some news instinct to our sports team, because they'd missed a few stories. Some of their commentators at the time who'd left the BBC by this stage. When Jonathan Davis, the famous rugby player, not Jonathan Fox Davis, but, the 80s Jonathan Davis, when he went to Rugby League, the commentator at the time, who'd left before I joined the BBC, was sitting next to him when he got the phone call to join Rugby League. So here's the most famous rugby union player decamping to a rival sport. We're losing our best ever player of a generation. And they didn't think it was a story. And there'd been numerous issues like this. So I was very lucky, right place, right time. They wanted me to join. And yeah, I spent about 8 years there presenting, some Welsh football internationals, some Welsh rugby internationals, some snooker, some bowls. And it was just a really fun time. And off the back of that, when I then left the BBC, started freelancing, again, that sports experience meant I got to work on Sky Sports News on Soccer Saturday with Jeff Stelling. And I did that for nearly 20 years, reporting live from football matches shown in pubs up and down the UK. And I used to get more texts and emails about that. When we worked together, I was still doing the Sky Sports thing before COVID stopped it. That was amazing. I love football. And to get paid.
There's
own report football.
to tell me. Jeff, back to you, Jeff.
Oh, my friend Ben, one of our producers at Nation Radio, as I did Soccer Saturday for so long. I worked at 4 or 5 different places, and they all let me keep working for Sky Sports because it was such a popular thing. I think they enjoyed the fact they could say our news editors also on Sky Sports. And yeah, I remember Ben saying he really enjoyed it, listening to one of my reports where you could sing, but yeah, back to you, Jeff. Yeah, over to you, Jeff, and back to you, Jeff. And he kind of. But I remember one of the funniest moments. Everyone remembers that Chris Kamara clip where he didn't spot the red card, and they crossed him and say, "What's happened with the red card?" And he was like, "What? Someone been sent off?" And Jeff Stelling's like, "What? You didn't see it?" And that very funny interaction. Well, I was next. I was at I think it was Brentford, and I was at the game. And when I'd been at the BBC and I did Grandstand, you used to stay on the line because we were only doing Cardiff City, Swansea City, Wrexham, Newport. So the 4 of us could stay on the line for the whole show and just chip in when we wanted. But because they've got reporters at most of the 90 grounds, you couldn't stay on the line. You had to dial into the Sky studio with your little portable studio when there was a goal or a red card or a penalty. And you dial and say, "Hi, there's been a goal at Cardiff City. Yep, you're up next. Don't worry." So I dialed in. There's been a goal at Brentford. Okay, you'll be next after Chris Kamara. So I was there listening to this whole exchange about the missing red card, which meant I had to really kind of steel myself not to laugh when I came on next and did my report, because I was still kind of giggling away at what had just happened, but I had to calm down and deliver it rationally. So yeah, that was fun.
And if anybody is asking, I always try and do this to Jeff. Every time he goes out, he does turn around and says, "My name is Jeff."
Oh, we watched that film the other day, actually.
21 Jump.
21 Jump Street. That's it. Yeah, yeah.
Every time I see that, I just think, I need to text Jeff.
Yeah, I hadn't clocked that when I saw it years ago. I hadn't clocked that. I was watching it with my partner and son the other day, and they were saying, "Oh, we love this bit now. My name's Jeff," and I was like, "What? I don't remember this bit." But yeah, there we go.
Well, Jeff, thank you.
Well, thanks for inviting me on.
Appreciate it. I will put descriptions down below for Jeff, all the socials, YouTube, everything. Go and check him out. He's an amazing guy. Really good friends of mine. Thank you for watching. Thank you for everybody in the chat this evening. Everybody's going to watch this later on. I do appreciate it. And I'll catch you all soon. So thank you.